So today I just got copies of like early release copies of my book in the mail. And
Oh,
so
wow.
literally like a minute ago, my wife pulled up with the kids and was like, "We got your milkshake. Congratulations."
Oh,
So,
wow. Hey, well, congrats on your book, man. That's awesome.
thank you. Thank
That's
you. So technically the release date's in July, but I got like my first case, which was I did not expect to get it this early. I got a case of 50 books and it's pretty exciting. So
nice.
you could touch it. It's a real thing. I mean, I
Yeah.
wrote it. I mean, I knew it was coming.
Can we see it? What's it called?
Yeah, it's called Survive and Thrive: How to
Survive.
Build a Profitable Business in Any Economy, including this one.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much ties right into like why I, wanted to meet you and talk to you. So obviously, well, let me just start by, I found you first on your YouTube channel, which is very interesting to me because you had a lot of videos. Like you also started a co-working space during the pandemic, which
Yes.
this is, so Waltham Works is my family's co-working space. My dad and I started it, uh, inception was in February. So then, during renovations is when the COVID crisis hit. So what's the story there? Like, where did you get the, idea for it? And obviously co-working had existed, but when did you make the leap in to say, I want to do this? And then at what point did COVID come and how did that play into your ideas?
Let me see if it says it. I think it might say this in the book, actually. So I was just going to see. Um, Here, I'll read you what it says in the about the author.
Sure.
So, I mean, it tells you who I am and all that kind of stuff. But then, so John Meese is the Dean of Platform University, co-founder of Notable Themes, and Chief Education Officer at Cowork Columbia, an entrepreneur center and co-working space he founded with his wife just 58 days before COVID-19 was confirmed in his community and he was forced to close.
Yeah.
So,
incredible.
Yeah, it's right there in the book. So my wife and I have talked about opening a co-working space for a long time. And I live in a small town, Columbia, Tennessee. It's the mule capital of the world. Not that there are that many competitors. I won't pop quiz you on your mule knowledge, but it's a half horse, half donkey. Specifically, it's the female horse and the male donkey, and it is both smarter than a horse and stronger than a donkey. And so they were very well loved animals. At one point in time, this was that was a huge deal. Like in World War I, for example, before the U.S. actually entered into the World War, 20,000 mules had been sent from Columbia, Tennessee, right here to the front to serve in the British military.
Wow. So integral part of the war then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So even before that, I mean, mules were like you lived and died before you had a tractor. I mean, like you lived and died by the strength of your animals on your farm and all that kind of stuff. So
wow.
One point in time, very big deal. Now we just have fun with it. Like our local coffee shop is called Needletown Coffee. Everything's mule themed here.
Okay. That's all right.
But so I live in a small town south of Nashville, and I really just wanted a co-working space to exist for my own benefit for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I had like rented, like I met like a couple of landlords, and I had rented like an office space before. And at one point in time, I rented out like a 1,000 square foot suite of like 4 or 5 different like private offices. It was really, I guess, meant for like a company, but I just needed one. And I actually split the one I was in with a friend, and then he helped pay the rent. And then I rented out, like I subleased out each of the rooms. Right. So it's kind of like a precursor to co-working in the sense that I was like basically just subleasing out offices. But that was a lot of work and I wasn't making any money off of it. It was just basically breaking even. But still, like I needed an office for my own work, and I run a couple of online businesses. And so I just felt like that there had to be a way to connect local community. And also I'm just really passionate about entrepreneurship. I mean, that's just, for me, that was very much a connection to the co-working space industry in the sense that like, man, like I really want to help entrepreneurs and create that support network that in a small rural area, like where I live in Columbia, Tennessee, there really isn't a great entrepreneurs network or resource center. Yeah. And I just kind of wanted that. I wanted that to exist for my own benefit, but also to be able to offer that to other people. So, my wife and I had talked about it for a while and just kind of waited. We almost pulled the trigger a couple times, depending upon the location. We're like, it's not really right. The timing's not really right. Well, the timing ended up being kind of like the worst possible timing in the sense when we finally did pull it off. So my wife was 8 months pregnant with our third son when we got the call from a friend of mine who's a landlord, who, I mean, his family owns a huge part of downtown. And he said, hey, I think a spot just opened up that actually is perfect for what you're looking for. Why don't you come take a look at it? So I looked at it and we're like, this is perfect. It's right in the center of downtown Columbia on the square. It was traditionally like there was an accounting company before here. So it's a lot of like separate rooms, kind of like meeting rooms and individual rooms. And I immediately saw the vision for like how it could be, with a nice upgrade, turned into a really great co-working space. So we said, yes, signed the lease, came back, got the keys, went to the hospital, had the baby, went home, made sure mom and the baby were okay. And then I came back to the co-working space with my dad, who's he was a painting contractor, for us to like look around and just kind of figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this? So,
so a lot happened at once. I mean, you went from basically 0 to 60, new business, new kid.
Yep.
Lots happening.
Yeah. And so we actually opened, I mean, like that was like, I guess probably October. My son was born in November, so it was all kind of like around then. And then in January 15th of 2020 is when we actually had our big grand opening. So we just passed our 1-year anniversary as we're recording this. So we had our big grand opening, and hundreds of people came to the space, and we made it a whole thing, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, also congrats on the 1 year. That's a big milestone, especially given the year that the anniversary is in. So
yes, exactly. So even when we first opened, right away we had a couple of teams join, which we're excited about. I mean, like just like teams of 3 people or 5 people, or and we're like, and that that's just a great way to grow your membership from the start. We then 58 days after we opened, we actually got the call from, we had started to hear about this COVID-19 thing, this coronavirus thing. And then that week, it was the week of so March 11th, I believe that was when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And then March 13th was when President Trump just declared a national state of emergency. And so that same day, March 13th, which was for many of us, like 3 days before, we hadn't heard of COVID-19. But that Friday, where the national state of emergency was declared, was also the same day that I got a call from our one and only employee that her mom had COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
In our county, in our community. And it was like the first case that I knew about. Technically it didn't even show up on according to our official records at the time, our county had 0 cases because they didn't even have a test. So they were like, we don't have a test, but you have all the symptoms, you've got it.
So they're assuming that she has COVID. It's your one and only employee. This is the beginning of your business. And okay. So,
and of course, this is also now we're all total pandemic pros. So, now we all know what to look for and what's a risk and not a risk. At the time, it was just pandemonium. It was well, if she, if you as an employee live in the same house as someone who has it, then we just have to shut down the business and do a deep clean in hazmat suits. That was pretty much the response.
Right.
That was just kind of at the time, that was
it was like the plague, basically. We thought it was
bodies in the streets. That was kind of that was the visual that,
Exactly.
So we did. So we closed the business for 2 weeks and we did a deep clean. We left the whole place because the idea was the virus will die on surfaces, was kind of the first idea, after about 10 days. And then we came in and did a deep clean. And then we reopened and we sent out this message like, hey guys, we're back, we're here. And 4 hours later, the governor of Tennessee issued an executive order closing our business and a lot of other businesses.
Wow. So what is I'm interested in, what category did your business fall into that they were going to shut down?
Well, they shut down all non-essential businesses. So it's more that we weren't on their list of approved businesses to stay open. That's actually, it's kind of like the reverse. It was the way it was phrased in our state. I know every state was a little different. It was everything's closed unless you're one of these guys. And I was like, well, we're not on that list. And I even talked to my attorney about it. And, it's it was one of those situations where they were like, well, are they going to enforce it? Kind of TBD, especially in Tennessee. It was more like an honor system, but I'm a pretty honorable guy. So
you didn't want to mess around. Yeah.
No, well,
I asked because for us, when we opened, there wasn't as much of a lockdown, but we looked into it, and Coworking Space at least in Massachusetts, falls into like a official mail receiver, which that is considered a mail an essential business. So
but are you a CMRA?
CMRA, that's like a licensed one, or that's
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say on the record, but
You probably shouldn't say on the record, but I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
We looked into that, and we weren't licensed as a CMRA. Like, we may still be like receiving mail for, as a lot of places do, but it was, anyways, it's a whole thing. I'm not going to critique how anyone responded to the situation, because it was
I was just interested
crazy days.
So because we toured another co-working space in the process of like developing ideas, and they said, since we're CMRA, we don't have to close. So that's where we got basically that info from, but they might have been licensed. So it would.
I mean, the C and CMRA stands for certified mail receiving agency. So unless you're certified, you're not a CMRA. I mean, but you know,
for sure.
But you might be an MRA, I guess. Is that a thing? I don't know.
Yeah, but we also there haven't been any orders to shut down, so we haven't broken the rules. Yeah, because we opened in August, so it was after a lot of the official full on.
Yeah.
So okay, so you get that order to shut down, and I'm interested. What do your clients say, and what's the sentiment overall for your clients and also for you?
Well, from day one, I started talking to other co-working space owners about how they were responding. And I was really turned off by how some of them at the beginning, they were like, all right, it's a lockdown, we're closed, but we're keeping your money. Because, the reality is, like, you're a member and it's not our fault we have to close. And, we've got to pay the rent. And like, I really just I was like, man, I'm kind of following like the ABC logic here. Like, okay, ABC, I'm following. It just didn't feel right, because I was like, man, if you think about it, as a customer, what our customers are paying us for, some of that is just the peace of mind that they don't have to rent out a building, that they don't have to be responsible for a lease. I mean, like, we offered month to month, no contract memberships. And so we were like, well, that's like the whole point of this, is that we're taking on the risk. That's like our whole business model, is that we're taking on the risks that you don't have to. Now, it turns out we just got hit with a heck of a bunch of risk all at once. But we just told our members from day one, like we're not going to charge you. Like, we're going to credit towards your account any membership that was left in the current month that you had already paid for. And we're not sure how long this lockdown is going to last, but we're not going to charge you for any of that. We're just going to eat the bill. And so, people appreciated that. I mean, it wasn't like they didn't appreciate it enough to volunteer to give us money, because everybody was freaking out. I mean, it was we were the only ones going through the situation.
Right. But you did right by your clients, because if you had if you basically had said what some of the other people said, the ABCD logic is at D, they basically say, well, when it's time to come back in, I'll go find someone else because you were really mean to me during this time.
Yeah. I mean, essentially it was like, look, I know, I felt like it's the right thing to do, even if it was expensive or hard or whatever. Yeah. So thankfully, I just called our landlord and negotiated with him too. And I was like, look, we owe you this rent. And he was like, yeah, I mean, he's like, even though you're not open, we're a business too. And I was like, I totally get that. But what if we just deferred the schedule of the timing? And he was like, totally, great. So I got it was either 2 or 3 months. I guess it would have been 2 months, I think, where we didn't actually pay rent, but we deferred it. We broke it out over our future rent payments. Yeah. So now our monthly rent is a little bit higher than it would have been. Right. But we got a break in the middle of that lockdown. And so it works out pretty well. Yeah. But yeah, so we reopened, but then by the time we reopened, it was kind of just the sentiment had changed so much that it was we were already a new, bringing a co-working space to a rural area was already kind of a new idea. Yeah. And now all of a sudden people were like, well, we can't leave our houses because we're not really sure what's going to go on. Right. And we were, we spaced things out. We got rid of a bunch of chairs and kind of regularly clean things. Right. But we did lose our team memberships, which I mentioned was a win from the beginning. Yeah. Was we had these teams, and they were the first memberships to be like, you know what, we're going to take a break for a little while. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do. And unfortunately, we have not seen those teams come back. So, that was a loss, because that's the equivalent of 10 memberships wrapped up in 2 or 3. Right. But we had other members join. I mean, ultimately, as the fall went on, and then we even in like November, December of last year, Tennessee became a really popular place to move to. If you're in like, I don't know, California or New York,
Right.
we had a lot of people moving to Tennessee. And so we had people who were like literally would go straight from meeting with a realtor to buy a house and then come over here and sign on and join the co-working space.
Okay. Wow.
And like as part of like the same trip. Like
Yeah.
they came down, they hadn't even moved yet. Like none of their stuff was here. And they just like flew over here, met with a realtor, and then joined the co-working space. You know, and that just so we had several members who joined that way back in November, December.
Yeah. So the existing members that you had pre-COVID left, but after
not all of them though, but yeah. But I mean, I would say even the majority of them. But we'd only, I mean, keep in mind, before COVID-19, we'd only been open for 58 days.
Exactly.
So, and those members were members that whole time, you know, some of them were only members for a couple of weeks before the lockdown hit.
Right. Yeah. So what I hear you saying is essentially, I think it is what we're seeing too. Like we lost potential clients, but there are a whole new set of clients that are interested in this now due to the pandemic. And there may be some overlap, but even if there isn't, there's like a fresh new pool of people who are interested in this kind of product.
Yeah. And we decided from the beginning that we were an entrepreneur support organization first. We just happened to do co-working as part of that.
Yeah.
So that meant in the middle of the lockdown, I was like, man, how can we help all these people, these businesses and entrepreneurs who are suffering? And not just even after the lockdown, as we're coming out of that and businesses are trying to rethink everything. Well, we partner with a company called Co-Starters, which you may be familiar with. They're based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, but they have this, you know, curriculum for businesses to help people like learn how to start new businesses. Well, they also came out with one called Rebuild in the midst of all of that, where like we actually did a rebuild cohort where we had several local business owners join the program and go through this 10-week program of like basically rethinking your business model in the new world, which now feels like old news. I mean, we're talking in 2021, but at the time it was, you know, a big deal. A lot of these companies were like struggling and not sure what to do. Unfortunately, at least I think only one member of Rebuild ended up having to close her business during that period of time. But the others were able to, I'm sorry?
Like not because of the like out of business in the sense that it's not just closed because of COVID, but went out of business forever.
Yeah, I mean, it was a transportation business. It was like they did, I mean, and so it was like they mostly, you know, did like, you know, schedule driver service for like events and things like that. So that it was like their business model. There was no longer demand for it. You know?
Right.
And so there was only so much we could do in Rebuild to help people turn things around. And so like some businesses like hers, they did actually close, but others, you know, we were able to help them. Yeah. And that was really cool to see. And so we offered that training program remotely. And I wrote this book. I mean, that was also something I did, honestly, like during that lockdown, when I was the only person, you know, during an executive order, I was the only person who could go into my office. Yeah. You know, then I was writing this book is what I was doing.
Right. So, and I saw on LinkedIn, like one of your comments or something that in January specifically, you have seen your membership double. Is that correct? Something like that.
Yeah, well, in the last month. And so that's what I was talking about, like at the end of December and then in January, where we've seen membership grow significantly. Some of that was, like I mentioned, the transplants, like people who are coming from California or New York and who were just like going, literally, it was like they went and met with a realtor and then they were here.
Yeah.
Which is a big difference for us from our normal sales, and the fact that like we're in the center of downtown Columbia, and a lot of people a year ago in our community weren't not familiar with the concept of co-working. So a lot of our sales cycle historically has been more conversational about like, what is a co-working space and why do I need this and that kind of stuff. And then you realizing like, oh, wait a second, I do need that. And one of the ways we've overcome that is like your first day pass is always free. And so we try to get people in the space because once they're here, they get it and they want to come back.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in addition to transplants, we've also had a couple corporate clients join. So not like full on. We have a couple teams that have joined where they just joined as a conference room only membership, which is something we created based on demand that we didn't expect to, where basically they just have like a monthly allotment of credits to book our conference room so they can have like all day team meetings, you know, from time to time and things like that. And so, you know, we have a couple of clients like that. I mean, that pays really well. And then we have others who are like, I mean, like, again, it's just like we created a student day pass because there were, you know, schools were going remote and high school students were trying to figure out how to do that. And some just like home's not a great environment for a work environment for them.
Right.
And then yeah, like we have one. I mean, I think like right now, like we have one woman who works here who works for PepsiCo. And we have one guy who works here who works for the cybersecurity division of Verizon. So we have like some of these like more like they're more like corporate clients who are working remotely right now, whose main offices are closed.
Yeah.
You know, and they just need somewhere else to work. But we have other customers who've been here all year, really, or I mean, like ever since like the lockdown, who joined as soon as we reopened, who are like one of our most consistent members, as he used to travel full time and do sales, like, and that doesn't happen now. It's all over a Zoom call, you know. And so like, and he's actually lives on a farm. In our case, that's like if you live on a farm out there where there's no good internet, then this is a huge deal to be able to come into town and have a place you can work with good coffee and Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because it matches a lot of what we're seeing, where there are people that used to travel that can't travel now and need a place to work. So we're seeing a lot of that too. And then
that's great.
The students, same thing. And professors, some are now coming.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mention that, but we had two college professors, I guess this was in the fall semester, who were teaching here. I mean, one of them was teaching at like Purdue, and one of them was teaching at Sewanee, which is here in Tennessee. Like it's called like the University of the South. But you know, again, like universities that were all remote, where all of a sudden it didn't matter where they were. Well, you know, either they had family here in town or they had a place to stay here in town, and this just made sense for them rather than it's for them to just teach from here.
Right. So do you think that like this new crop of people who are interested in co-working, what happens when, in your mind, when people can go back to work, to these people who are at the co-working space? And will you see the people who used to be interested come back? Like, what do you see playing out there? Because we're optimistic right now. Like, I always think about like worst case scenario. So that's why I'm asking. You know, I'm interested because you're in the same exact business. So, what happens when COVID things cool down, vaccine is out? Will we see people flock back to the office, or will there just be like a permanent no more office, and now co-working is super elevated?
Well, I definitely think co-working is going to be super elevated. I mean, it's just like it's you know, as an industry, co-working spaces are only about 14 years old. Which, if you think about it, you're like, that's actually not very long. I mean, there's not that much around that's that new in terms of industry. And so what we just saw was that with the lockdowns and with the pandemic response and with companies going remote and schools going remote, we just saw this like massive global experiment in remote work. And the reality is a lot of people have found out from that experiment, wait a second, you mean I don't need to be paying $14,000 a month for a commercial office space for my team? You know, like, yeah, you know, or employees have realized, wait a second, you mean, I mean, I've talked to several people who work for big companies who said like, I've tried to convince my boss to let us work remotely for years. And I've always said it would never work. Well, now they were forced to try it. Turns out it works great. And so we're going to, you know, there are plenty of people who are going to go back to working in person and working in remote. But, you know, the latest study I read, I think it was in Forbes, was that 1 in 4, the projection is that like moving forward, 1 in 4 jobs will be remote. And I think that's probably, my gut is that that's probably about right. And, you know, there's lots of reasons for that. And so I think there will be this continued demand in co-working. But one of the biggest shifts we're seeing right now is that, if you look at like the maps of how internet usage has changed over the last year now, you can see how like in January of 2020, then during like Monday through Friday 9 to 5, there's these huge spikes on the map of internet usage in big cities, metropolitan areas. And that's where also, by the way, you see all these co-working spaces, huge co-working spaces, big co-working space companies competing over real estate in the big cities. But then what you saw over this spring is that as people shifted to remote work, they also shifted location. And so all of a sudden you see the internet usage map essentially spike Monday through Friday 9 to 5 in more suburban areas and rural areas where people actually live. I mean, and not just where they're commuting to work. And so the reality is that I think in big metropolitan areas, this is not true across the board, but if I were to just to like overgeneralize them, I think in big metropolitan areas, there's a lot of co-working spaces. in a lot of those space, and they're all really competing for the same customers. But in suburban areas and rural America, if you go and explore that just for a minute, you realize, wow, they're so underserved. There's not really many good options out there. And so I think that's where my hunch is, that's where you'll see the biggest shift in the market, is in suburban areas and rural areas, and more of the places where people want to not just shop local, but work local, where that's like part of the new shift that's coming out of this, long after we're done talking about COVID-19. I mean, I think that'll stick around for a while.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's kind of like a huge opportunity that used to be seen as a bad thing. If you had real estate in the suburbs, those were all the places that were depressed. But with this new shift, I think a co-working space could even be like a centralized hub where it'll impact the surrounding area, like your space. So I'm in a suburb of, it's like a city of Waltham, but it's right outside Boston.
Okay.
A little bit different than Columbus, but basically small city, small town, and we're right in the center. So, and you can there's 10 times, maybe even more of those offices open than in the urban areas, the expensive, highly competed real estate. So to me, it's what I'm thinking about now is like, given that what you just said, what should we be doing as co-working owners, thinking about whether it's expansion or growing the business, because there is a ceiling on how many people you can have in one space. Is that something you think about, or are you this is okay? So what about now that we've basically found out that there is a big risk in a downturn? Let's say your landlord wasn't willing to negotiate. Are there ways for co-working spaces to leverage the vacant office space that will be like the office space that will eventually be vacant because whoever is in there now is not going to renew, or they were never even able to find people leading up to the pandemic? Can we negotiate better leases? Like, how does that work?
Right. Well, I think there's going to be a lot of shifts that happen. And so, I mean, like, okay, one of them is just the fact that, like, the reality is there's going to be a really dramatic shift in commercial real estate, more than almost any other industry, over the next 5 to 10 years. And you haven't seen that happen yet dramatically in some ways because people are still stuck in leases. But there's so many companies that are saying, like, there's no reason for us to pay $10,000, $14,000, $30,000 a month for this big office space. I mean, it's just overhead that doesn't make sense on the company's P&L anymore. So I think you'll see a big shift there, which means that as a result of that, the actual, the price of either renting or buying commercial real estate is going to drop across the board. Now that may shift, and actually it may go up in suburban areas. But I think, like, if across the board, like averaging out, I think the demand's going to go down. And so it's going to shift. And so that's a great opportunity for co-working space operators to jump in there. And there's going to be a little bit of just a gold rush of, like, opening co-working spaces. But I think that's where probably a lot of people will get distracted, is focusing on just, like, getting specific office space so that they can open a co-working space, that they can get a bunch of, butts and seats and make money from co-working. I think there will be a gold rush for that, but I think that will run out, where all of a sudden you'll reach a point where you've satisfied the demand for a co-working space. And then now all of a sudden you have multiple co-working spaces in each region, and people get to kind of shop around. And that's where it becomes really important to have a differentiator. What are you? Are you just a co-working space? Or is there something more to it? Like, what kind of customers do you want to attract?
Right.
So we have plenty of customers who are not entrepreneurs. But when you walk by Cowork Columbia, you can't help but notice this giant teal wall with white letters that says "Entrepreneurs Welcome." You can see it from the street. It's the first thing you see when you walk in the door. And that's part of our commitment to really being a business that serves entrepreneurs first. Now, there are plenty of other people that walk in, they're like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I'm not an entrepreneur, but I can still work here. And that's fine. Like, but that magnet attracts other people who walk by, stop in their tracks, do a double take, and then walk in the door and say, wait, what's going on? And so for us, we're an entrepreneur support organization first. And so I totally foresee us having more, like, online content, training content in the future, and even stuff that we charge for. And in addition to having a co-working space. And I think that's just a natural extension of who we serve. But that's, like, what I see as, like, the biggest, I guess, need moving forward with co-working spaces, is to really just pick your niche in terms of your customers, in terms of, like, there are some co-working spaces which are focused on, young mothers. And so where it's a natural extension then to have some sort of childcare component be a part of your co-working space.
Right.
I mean, like there's so many different really demographics that need what a co-working space has to offer, but the needs are not all the same. Not all people who work remotely have the same needs.
Yeah.
And so I think getting clarity on that is helpful. Because our focus is entrepreneurs, that means we also have a bookstore here where we sell business books, and we have, planners that we sell as well, productivity planners. And, that's the secondary revenue stream for us. It's not a huge amount of money. It doesn't pay the rent, but it brings in some extra cash, and it's like, it is a revenue generator for us.
Yeah.
And so I think thinking outside of just office space is important for co-working spaces moving forward.
Interesting. Yeah. I really like that. And I think it seems competitive right now. Like there in Boston, for sure, there's 10, 15 co-working companies with multiple locations. But when you look at the number of offices in general versus the number of co-working spaces, market is huge. There's so much opportunity. So, yeah, that's really interesting. I think, what is your time like? Do you have to run? I don't know what your schedule is.
Well, I don't know. I'm here at your request. So you tell me the schedule.
Okay. Yeah. Cause your admin was just saying that you might not be free past, well, I guess it's 4:38 your time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you don't just have a co-working space. You also have other businesses. What is what's your advice on juggling multiple different businesses and having them all be successful?
I wrote a book on that actually. So
okay, so that's
so you should buy that. So go to surviveandthrivebook.com to get on the early release list. But yeah, I mean, all seriousness, I mean, that's a good idea. You should do that.
I will do that for sure. And for our listeners, our many listeners will definitely flock to that website. I guarantee it.
Good. So I think that the reality is that at the core of each business is this idea that you're creating a real solution to a real problem for real people. So you have to get clear on who the real people are that you're serving, and what's the real problem they have, and what's your real solution. That's your product or your service is your solution to their problem. But I use that term real a lot because you think about Quibi as a good example of like a classic Silicon Valley, massively funded company where they were like, what we're going to do? We're going to create videos that go portrait mode. We're going to create short form videos that are in portrait mode. And we're going to get these A-list celebrities to do these, or at least B-list celebrities to do these essentially like original content shows, which is a cool idea until you stop for a second and you realize like, that's a solution to a problem nobody needed solved. The reality is like, we don't need more portrait style content because we have all of our friends creating that content for us on Instagram stories all day, every day, or on TikTok all day, every day. And so we don't need some celebrity. And in fact, actually, we have celebrities on Instagram and TikTok creating portrait style short form content for us on a regular basis. We don't need some company to put a studio together just to create that. But, and here's the other thing, like if we were actually going to watch like a long form, like video, there's a reason, by the way, that like TVs are horizontal. It's because our eyes are side by side. That's how we're physically designed as like human beings. They're not like one above the other, which would be like portrait style. And so there's lots of reasons why like Quibi failed, but that's the biggest one, is that it's just like, there's no real people who had a real problem that Quibi's service was a real solution for. Now, to give them credit as a company, one thing they did that a lot of Silicon Valley companies don't do is they recognized that before they blew through all the investor money. Right. And so they actually closed up shop and they said, you know what? Turns out people don't actually need this. And they gave their investors back a huge chunk of their money. And then they sold the actual content to Roku as like just to try to cut their losses. So let's give them credit for a second that a lot of people would just like hustle in the face of that and create like, I think Juicero is another example of that, like a Silicon Valley backed company that like created these really expensive, like juicing. It's sort of like a juicing machine, but it was like, oh, you can get, it's going to get you this like amazing, like really healthy juice. Yeah. It comes with an app. It's super fancy, but the way that you actually like but you have to like feed, I think they call it juice packs into the juicero to get the drink. But the juice pack was basically like just like a squeeze pouch. So it's like you could just literally squeeze it into your cup
Right.
with
The
water.
machine had like, it was like cold pressed. So it was like $1,000 juicer and it would press the packet, but then people realized that they could just press the packet themselves.
They could just press the packet. Yeah. And it was like one of those things, like that's a good example of where like that was a solution to a problem nobody had. So that's why I use the term real when I say like a business at its core is creating a real solution to a real problem for real people. Because they figure out who are the real people out there who have a real problem that you can create a real solution for. And then everything else in business is really stems from that. It's just a question of, okay, well then how do you do it? Once you get clear on who the real people are, then the question is, okay, well, how do I get their attention? Right? And how do I deliver a product that's going to solve their problem? You know, like everything else in business really stems from that core decision.
Right. And then, but when you have multiple different income streams and multiple businesses, what are your thoughts on organizing just systematically? Like, let's say you've solved that problem multiple times over. Operationally, how do you be able to, is that just some people can multitask, some people can't, or is there a system that is used by really successful people to sort out all the issues for, this business has this issues and I'm going to accomplish it this way?
Well, in general, nobody can multitask. I mean, that's just a biological fact, more or less, that you can't you cannot consciously focus on two different tasks at the same time. But you can, once you recognize that what you're really doing is single tasking and you're task switching, then you can try to minimize how much you switch tasks. And then you can say, like, I have working blocks on my calendar, so I know which business I'm working on for what periods of time. And I have a team in place so that, like with the co-working business, for example, I actually do almost no work for the co-working business. At this point, we have enough members that, it breaks even, may generate a small profit, but really it's mostly a break even right now. And at this time, I look at my 3 different businesses and I say, okay, I see some really lucrative opportunities over here with this business, over here with this business. And the co-working business, it's still a little TBD right now with all the uncertainty in the air around the pandemic. And so like, I'm going to let that just be for now and focus on some of the other ones. And that's the benefit. In my mind, that's the benefit to having these different revenue streams or different businesses, is that you can choose to then say like, okay, well, which one of these is on the right side of the situation? Like which one of these is going to be the easiest to grow? And it's like, well, I've got a software company where we create website templates, WordPress themes, but it's a website builder. It's a content publication platform for content creators. Well, if anything, their business has only been helped by this changing habits of this last year.
Right.
So that's an industry where we can make a big difference and serve people. So let's focus on that. And then through johnmeese.com with my own podcast and my own book, again, it's like there's so many entrepreneurs who are real people who have a real problem. They don't know how to build their business. And so that's what I created this book for. That's what I created my own podcast for. By the same name, Survive and Thrive, is all about helping those people. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's a really great way to put it. And you might not have, all 3 things don't have to be booming all at the same time. And in fact, it's maybe even better if they aren't, because that means you can focus on and segment out the growth individually. And some will be, it switches, right? Probably.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the idea, is that like, I'm going to shift between each of the businesses. First of all, I have to say this, even though I'm a serial entrepreneur, I don't recommend it. The first thing I would say is, if you can avoid having 3 businesses, do it. I've launched a business with each of my 3 kids at the same time. Again, if you can avoid launching a business and having a kid at the same time, avoid it. I just can't, I guess. I don't know. Like it's like each of these opportunities, it's like the co-working space example we talked earlier about when my youngest son was born and we started the co-working space at the same time. That wasn't like a strategy. It was just like, that's just how the timing worked out.
Right.
It's actually very difficult, I think, to balance focus between multiple different businesses.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I've been able to like build a team around me that can help run each of the businesses so that I can focus on, the unique areas where I add value and where I can lead. But I do think that like, it's not, I don't know if anyone's cut out for it.
Yeah.
So I'm not recommending it. I mean, I can give you tips and tricks on how to organize things if that's what you're looking for. But I mean, that's philosophically, it's just like recognize that you can't multitask and decide what you're going to focus on. I think that's a good place to start.
Right. Yeah. Recognize that you can't multitask. So don't try to multitask. And
right.
Yeah. I like that. And so on the co-working side of things, because it's me and my dad essentially. And we're operating everything, and we have a cleaning crew that comes in, and everything else is done by us. But that being said, there's ultimately a few things that have to get done every day, but it's not like you're working like 9 hours in a day. Do you see that there's a need for, a lot of these spaces have like community managers? Do you find that you need to have one? And what are your thoughts on employees within your co-working space business?
So I have one employee within the co-working space business, and we actually started in the, well, I should say, like, I also, like, my wife is my business partner in that business, but through different parts of this past year, depending upon whether or not the preschool is in session or not, there's been times where she's been a full-time mom.
Right.
So I think a community manager is a phenomenal concept. And so I think if the business can afford it financially, to be able to say, like, we're going to have somebody who's like loving on the community, serving the community, growing the membership, acting as a bit of a sales and marketing team, as well as a customer experience, all wrapped into one. I think that's really great. Where we're at with our space, we try to keep costs pretty lean. And so we don't have the budget for that. But what we do have with Amber, she's actually at this point, she's my executive assistant primarily. So we've actually shifted where, like, again, it's like, once with the co-working space, once you've got a core membership base, you have some people scheduling tours, you have some things, somebody's going to make coffee, and, there's a few things to do, but it's not really like you're running around like with a ton of stuff to do all the time.
Right.
And so she actually supports me in one of my other businesses, primarily, and then just kind of like does some of the co-working stuff as well. She's here as well to keep that running smoothly. So, that's kind of how we've approached it, is just, systemize as much as possible, automate as much as possible. I will say one shift we made was we used to be open like to the public Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And we actually shifted to like members only 24/7 access. And then you can schedule a tour if you're not a member, or schedule a day pass, like even a free day pass.
Yeah.
That's done great. We haven't had any pushback against that. That's really, actually, I don't know if that's related, but those are the months where we've had our biggest growth have been since we made that shift. And it's just taken some pressure off in terms of having to like listen for the door.
Exactly. Yeah.
Essentially.
Frees up your time. Yeah. We're on the same thing from the beginning. We had 24/7 and it's all keypad access, but we don't have someone at the front desk, but we do have a front desk. So it's something, I always think about whether or not that's needed right now or not, but
we used to have a front desk. We actually got rid of it and replaced it with just some other co-working space tables. And people love the front room. But for us, there's like big windows there. So we put a couple small like tables in front of the windows and got rid of the front desk. And that's a really popular workspace now. So, but it also acts as marketing, because I'll run into someone, they're like, wait, you own Cowork Columbia? Yeah, I see people working in your window all the time.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think it's we find actually that your members want to spend their time working. So they're really not, it's not like a typical service business where you're getting requests all the time. It's your members are focused on their job and their business. So it's something I didn't really realize before starting this.
Yeah. That's a good point.
You think there's gonna be a lot of stuff going on, but I like what you said, you utilize somebody in two different businesses, and in that way it kind of makes up for the work that they might not have to do in one business, they'll make up for in the other way. That's nice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any, you wrote this book. Do you have anything that's in there that you want to get out that we haven't discussed yet? I'm sure a lot.
There's a lot of stuff in this book that I think is really helpful and powerful, but I would say that, like, my favorite concept, which was new to me, what I learned while writing the book, was the concept of tacking. I'm not sure if you can really see that illustration.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's a boating concept. It's essentially, how do you sail against the wind? And we overuse this word pivot, I think, in business, especially this last year, we heard a lot of like, you got to pivot, you got to pivot, you got to pivot. Maybe, to pivot is like to dramatically change course or direction and move into a new direction. And the reality is, sometimes that's what you're doing, but a lot of times what you're really doing is you're making micro adjustments, which in boating, they refer to that as tacking, which, when you're facing the wind, it's literally like the way that you go against the wind is you turn and then you turn and then you turn and you adjust your sails so that you build you can get momentum off of that resistance.
Yep.
With the wind, and ultimately make forward motion. And so I think, like, as an entrepreneur, I try to give myself that encouragement, and to people around me, that like like my wife as my business partner, I have talked about this, that she's like, she brought this up last year at one point. I was like, man, I feel like we're changing the plan a lot. I was like, yeah, but if you think about it, we're not dramatically changing it. We're tacking. I mean, we're like making little micro adjustments to move against the wind. And that's been really helpful for us, just to kind of reframe that as like, that's a good thing. That's how you move against the wind. And so in the face of changing winds, sometimes you got to do a bit of tacking.
Right. Yeah. Changing of the winds.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I really like that. And I'm definitely, so when is your book available?
Yeah, so it'll be in bookstores in July, if you believe it, July 27th. Yeah. I'm used to I run like an online business where everything's like if I want it done now, it's done now. Right. And so this has definitely been, I'm working with a publisher, which is great. I have a great relationship with them. But it's definitely been a little unusual, but yeah. But if you go to surviveandthrivebook.com, you can pre-order or join the early release list and maybe get an early preview copy. I just had 50 show up in a box over there. So nice. I've got to give some early advanced reading copies to somebody. So you should maybe check it out.
Well, hey, I'm definitely going to go on there and get a pre-order and check out your website. I've loved ever since I found your YouTube channel while researching other co-working spaces. I liked all your content on there and
thank you.
Stuff on your LinkedIn too. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have a lot going on. So good luck to you and your business. It's also great to partner with other co-working spaces, especially local ones that are not, owned by big businesses or have multiple spaces. We got to stick together and learn from each other. So I have certainly.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for making time for us to talk, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, John. All right. Well, you take care now.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.